The coppery tang in the air, faint but undeniable, stirred a profound, alien hunger deep within me, a craving that had nothing to do with sustenance and everything to do with the beast I was becoming. Fear, raw and primal, coursed through my veins, but not from the usual physiological response I'd come to recognize. This was a deeper, colder dread, an acknowledgement of the encroaching darkness. It had been 3 days since my last proper meal, not that solid food truly satisfied the gnawing emptiness anymore. The hunger, that insidious, all-consuming void, was returning, thrumming beneath my skin like a caged animal. I took a deep breath, the stale apartment air doing little to steady the tremor in my hand, and began typing, "My name is Arthur Vance." What I'm about to share will sound impossible, a fevered dream spun from the depths of madness, but I swear every word is true. Before I become something I can't control, something that will erase every shred of who I once was, I need to expose what the government has done, what they turned us into. The words flowed easier after that first sentence, a torrent of confession, a desperate plea for the world to witness my final act of defiance at 45. I barely resembled the confident soldier I once was. My reflection showed a face etched with premature lines, a map of exhaustion and unspeakable trauma. Dark circles perpetually shadowed my eyes, monuments to years of insomnia, the relentless nightmares that wouldn't let me rest. The memories remained too vivid, too visceral, a constant loop of blood and screams and monstrous transformation. It started in 2007. I was 28 then, a special forces operative with a promising military career stretching out before me, clear and bright. The selection came without warning, a terse transfer order that mentioned only a specialized training program requiring my unique qualifications. It was vague, unsettling even, but in the military you followed orders. 4 other soldiers received the same cryptic directive: Marcus Mac O'Malley, Elena Petrova, Silas Ghost Thorne, and Kaylin Kale Dubois. None of us knew each other before. We came from different units, different backgrounds, a patchwork of elite fighting forces. But we shared a common profile: peak physical condition, exceptional service records, and most crucially, no immediate family connections. We were disposable, easily made to vanish. They flew us to a remote facility hidden deep in the northern Alaskan wilderness, miles from the nearest town. The helicopter ride from the base in Fairbanks took 3 grueling hours, soaring over an endless expanse of snow-dusted tundra and jagged peaks. The sheer isolation screamed a silent warning. Once you were here, you were utterly cut off. Commander Thorne greeted us upon arrival. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed in a crisp uniform, with steel-gray hair that seemed to absorb all light, and eyes of such an unnerving, icy blue that they never seemed to blink. "Gentleman and soldier," he said, his gaze briefly flicking to Elena, his voice a low, resonant rumble that carried an undercurrent of absolute authority. "Consider yourselves privileged. You've been selected for Project Chimera, a program that will redefine warfare in the 21st century. He paced before us in the facility's main briefing room, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, casting a sterile glow on the polished concrete floor. "What happens here remains classified at the highest level. You will not discuss your experiences with anyone outside this facility, not even among yourselves, outside of designated areas. Absolute discretion is paramount." Kale, always the pragmatic one, raised his hand. "Sir, what exactly will we be doing here?" Commander Thorne's lips twitched in what might have been a smile, a chilling, humorless curve. "Advancing your capabilities, Kale. If successful, you'll return to service with career trajectories many would kill for." He paused, his gaze sweeping over each of us. Any man or woman who can't maintain absolute discretion should speak now. There's still time to return to your regular duties with no questions asked. None of us spoke up. We were soldiers. Following orders was ingrained, a reflex. The promise of advancement was just an added bonus, a sweetening of an already compelling duty. The first 3 weeks were a blur of intensive baseline testing. We were put through a gauntlet of physical endurance trials, our limits pushed to breaking point. Cognitive processing tests measured our mental acuity under extreme pressure. Stress response and pain tolerance were meticulously catalogued. Blood was drawn every morning and evening, vials upon vials, our life force drained into sterile containers. Despite the rigorous demands, we formed an easy friendship through our shared hardship. Mac, with his boisterous laughter and quick wit, was the most sociable, always ready with a joke to break the tension. Kale naturally fell into the leadership role, his calm, measured approach earning our immediate respect. Silas was the quiet workhorse, dependable and steady, his movements economical and precise. Elena was perceptive, her sharp eyes picking up on details others missed, her quiet strength a constant reassurance. And me, I was the cautious one, always analyzing, looking for angles, searching for exits that might not exist. Dr. Eris Thorne oversaw our medical evaluations. She was a woman of stark efficiency, her movements precise, her face devoid of emotion. "Your baseline performances are excellent," she told us one evening, her voice clinical, devoid of warmth, as we gathered in the stark, gleaming lab. "But tomorrow we begin the real work." She unveiled a reinforced case, its latches glinting under the fluorescent lights, and opened it with a flourish that was almost theatrical. Inside, nestled in velvet cutouts, were 5 syringes, each filled with an amber liquid that seemed to shimmer, almost glow with an inner light. "This," she announced, a poorly concealed pride coloring her voice, a rare crack in her professional facade, "is Serum Omega. It will revolutionize warfare by enhancing your natural capabilities beyond current human limitations." I remember the silence that followed, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the hum of the lab equipment. We all stared at those syringes, a mixture of awe and trepidation. Enhancement wasn't new to military discussions, but something about the gleam in Dr. Thorne's eyes, the almost manic intensity, sent a chill through me. "Side effects?" I asked, my voice betraying my apprehension. "Minor and temporary," she replied, too quickly, too dismissively. "Fever, muscle pain, increased appetite, all expected responses as your bodies adapt." The consent forms came next. Dozens of pages of dense scientific jargon and inscrutable legal clauses. I read mine more carefully than the others, my eyes snagging on vague phrases about unforeseen physiological adaptations and behavioral modifications. I hesitated when it came time to sign, a knot of unease tightening in my stomach. Having second thoughts, Vance. Mac grinned from across the table, his signature already a bold flourish on the paper. "Afraid you won't keep up with the rest of us." The others had all signed. Cale gave me a reassuring nod, his eyes conveying a quiet determination. "We're in this together." I signed. A decision that haunts me every day since, a brand on my soul. The first injection happened the next morning. We sat in a row of sterile medical chairs, the air thick with antiseptic and unspoken fear. Dr. Thorne administered the serum herself, her touch disarmingly gentle. When my turn came, the needle slid into my vein with practiced precision. The liquid entered my bloodstream, and immediately I felt it. A burning sensation, searing hot, spreading from my arm through my entire body. "Jesus," Silas gasped from 2 seats down, gripping his armrests, his face contorted in pain. The pain intensified, muscles contracting violently, vision blurring into a kaleidoscope of light and shadow. I bit down on my lip until I tasted blood, determined not to scream, not to give them the satisfaction. Then, as suddenly as it began, the pain transformed into something else entirely. A wave of pure, unadulterated euphoria washed through my system, intoxicating and overwhelming. My senses sharpened dramatically. I could hear the accelerated heartbeats of everyone in the room, the faint hum of the ventilation system, the distant rumble of a generator. I could smell the antiseptic on Dr. Thorne's hands, the faint metallic tang of our own sweat, even the dust particles dancing in the single sunbeam that pierced the high window. "Holy," Cale whispered, his eyes wide, a dazed smile spreading across his face. "I feel incredible." The changes accumulated rapidly over the following days, accelerating with each passing hour. Our bodies, once at peak human conditioning, were transforming into something far beyond. We could lift twice our previous maximums without a strain. I ran 20 miles on the indoor track, my lungs never burning, my legs never tiring. Mac shattered the facility's shooting range record, hitting targets at distances that should have been impossible without a scope. His movements a blur of terrifying precision. In the cafeteria one evening, 5 days after the first injection, we celebrated our transformation, our ascension into Project Chimera. Cale raised his water glass in a toast. "To making gods of mere mortals," he declared, his voice filled with a giddy exuberance. "I can't wait to see what we'll be capable of in another week," Silas added, his quiet demeanor replaced by an almost boyish excitement. I smiled and toasted with them, but something felt wrong beneath my enthusiasm, a persistent tremor of unease. It was the way Dr. Thorne documented our progress with almost obsessive detail, her notes scribbled furiously, her gaze unnervingly intense. It was the hushed, heated arguments I'd overheard between her and Commander Thorne, their voices barely audible as I walked past his office late at night, my new senses picking up fragments. "The molecular binding is still unstable," she'd insisted, her voice tight with frustration. "We need more time before increasing the dosage." "Washington wants results, not excuses, Doctor," he'd replied, his tone chillingly devoid of patience. At night, I'd lie awake, my enhanced senses making sleep a distant luxury, listening. I could hear Mac pacing restlessly in his room next door, the muffled thump-thump of his footsteps. Sometimes he muttered to himself, words I couldn't quite make out despite my amplified hearing. Once I heard him hammering his wall with what sounded like his bare fist, over and over, until the concrete cracked with a sickening groan. It wasn't an accident. It was an explosion of raw, uncontained power. The pounding from Mac's room eventually stopped that night, but my unease continued to grow, burrowing deep into my core. I lay awake until dawn, listening for any further disturbances, my enhanced senses making true rest impossible. When the facility lights automatically brightened at 600, I was already dressed and waiting, the first one in the training area. 6 weeks into Project Chimera, our physical transformations had accelerated beyond anything we'd imagined. The morning testing routine had become as ingrained as breathing, weight assessment, reflexes, cognitive processing drills, and always the blood draws. Every 8 hours, like clockwork, Dr. Thorne or one of her assistants would extract vials of our blood for analysis. Another day, another pint, I joked weakly as a technician slid the needle into my vein with practiced efficiency. The young man didn't respond. None of them ever did. The research staff maintained a clinical distance that had once seemed professional but now felt deliberate, almost like fear. Our training intensified as Dr. Thorne pushed us to test new capabilities. The regular exercise equipment had been replaced with reinforced versions, after Alina accidentally bent a barbell during a warm-up last week. This morning, I completed 100 pull-ups without breaking a sweat before moving to the treadmill, where I ran at 30 miles per hour for nearly an hour, my vision fixed on the blurring scenery outside the reinforced windows. But Mac was something else entirely. He entered the gym late, his movements jerky, eyes fixed straight ahead, his pupils so dilated his irises were nearly invisible. When he stepped onto the treadmill, he cranked it to maximum speed and ran for 3 straight hours. No water breaks, no visible fatigue, no change in his relentless pace. Commander Thorne stood watching him with undisguised pride, a predatory gleam in his icy blue eyes, while Dr. Thorne scribbled notes furiously on her tablet, her face pale. "Remarkable," I overheard Commander Thorne say, his voice low but audible to my enhanced hearing. "O'Malley's adaptation rate exceeds all projections." "Yes, though there are anomalies in his latest blood work that warrant," Dr. Thorne began, her voice hesitant. "Numbers on paper, Doctor," Commander Thorne cut her off with a dismissive wave. "Look at him," he gestured toward Mac with an approving nod. "That's the future of warfare right there." During afternoon sparring, we rotated partners as usual. When my turn with Mac came, I approached him cautiously. In his place stood something else. His muscles had grown disproportionate to his frame, bulging unnaturally, veins pulsing visibly beneath his skin. His eyes, though still technically human, held a cold, predatory gleam. "Ready, Vance?" Mac's voice had deepened to a rasp, a guttural growl that barely resembled his usual tone. I barely had time to nod before he launched himself at me with frightening speed, a blur of gray skin and raw power. I dodged his first strike by mere millimeters, feeling the air displace next to my ear, a miniature sonic boom. His second connected with my ribs, sending me sliding across the mat despite my enhanced durability. A sharp crack echoed in the enclosed space. "Point," called the supervising officer. We reset positions. This time I managed to block his initial assault and counter with a sweeping kick that would have taken down any normal opponent. Mac merely absorbed the impact, his feet barely shifting, and grabbed my arm, twisting until I had to tap out, the joints screaming in protest. When Alina took my place against Mac, I expected the usual controlled demonstration of technique, a clash of honed skills. Instead, Mac moved with unexpected savagery. Alina blocked the first 2 strikes, her defenses sharp, but missed the third, a vicious uppercut that sent her sprawling, blood welling from her nose. Before anyone could intervene, Mac pounced on her, grabbing Alina's right arm and wrenching it at an unnatural angle. The crack echoed through the gym, sickeningly loud. Alina's scream followed immediately, a raw, primal sound of agony. Medical team to the training floor, the supervisor called into his radio, his voice laced with panic. Mac stood over Alina, breathing heavily, a strange, almost vacant smile on his mouth. "Sorry," he said, his voice a flat monotone, without a trace of remorse. "Accident that evening, a cold dread settling over me, I sought out Dr. Thorne in her lab. She looked up from her microscope with visible irritation when I entered. Vance, this is outside your scheduled testing window." "It's about Mac," I said, closing the reinforced door behind me, the heavy clang echoing in the sterile room. "Something's wrong with him." She sighed, a weary exhalation, and removed her glasses, pinching the bridge of her nose. "If you're referring to the training incident, accidents happen, especially with enhanced strength. Minor sprain, she'll recover." "It wasn't an accident," I insisted, my voice tight with controlled anger. "You've seen how he's changing, the aggression. The physical changes, his eyes. What I see is exceptional adaptation to the serum." She cut me off, her voice sharp. "Mac's metrics are precisely what this project aims to achieve. And his behavior, the way he's isolated himself, the way he just snapped." Dr. Thorne studied me for a long moment, her unblinking gaze unnervingly piercing. "Are you concerned about O'Malley's well-being, Vance, or are you struggling with the fact that he is outperforming you?" Her accusation stung, hitting a raw nerve. "This isn't about competition," I shot back. "Isn't it?" she replied, a faint, condescending smile playing on her lips. "You were special forces, accustomed to being the best, the top of the pyramid. Now you're not." She turned back to her microscope, dismissing me. "I'll note your concerns, but I suggest you focus on your own progress rather than undermining a teammate's success." I left the lab more unsettled than when I'd entered, the encounter leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. That night's sleep was an impossible luxury. Unable to find rest, a gnawing suspicion prompted me to check on Alina in the medical wing. The facility was eerily quiet during night hours, my footsteps echoing down the concrete corridors, amplifying the sense of dread. As I passed the main laboratory, a movement caught my eye. The door was ajar, a thin line of light showing in the hallway. I approached cautiously, my enhanced senses on high alert, and peered inside. Mac stood with his back to the door, hunched over one of the refrigeration units. At first I thought he might be stealing medication, a desperate attempt to quell some internal agony. But then he turned slightly, and I saw what was in his hand, a medical blood bag. He was drinking from it, gulping down the dark, viscous liquid with a chilling fervor. The realization slammed into me, cold and horrifying. I must have made some sound, a choked gasp perhaps, because his head snapped toward me with inhuman quickness. Blood dripped from the corner of his mouth, a grotesque crimson stain. His dilated eyes, now almost completely black, locked onto mine, and for a second neither of us moved. He wasn't surprised, not truly. There was only a chilling, ancient recognition in those eyes. "Need it," he said simply, his voice a low, guttural rasp, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand, smearing the blood across his cheek like war paint. "You will too, eventually." He pushed past me into the corridor, his movements fluid, unsettlingly swift, leaving the empty blood bag crumpled on the counter like a discarded wrapper. The next morning, the image of Mac, a creature of nightmare, haunted me. I found Cale alone in the cafeteria, pushing a gargantuan breakfast tray, a huge amount of food, necessary for our hyper-accelerated metabolisms. He looked up from his meal. "You look like hell," he observed, his voice tinged with concern as I slid into the chair across from him. "I need to talk to you about Mac," I told him, my voice low, urgent. I recounted everything. The sparring incident, Dr. Thorne's dismissive attitude, and finally what I'd witnessed in the lab. Cale listened without interrupting, his expression growing progressively more concerned with each horrifying detail. "Blood drinking." He kept his voice low, almost a whisper, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You're sure?" "Saw it with my own eyes," I confirmed, a shiver running down my spine. "And he said I'd need it too, eventually. What the hell does that mean, Cale?" Cale pushed his tray aside, the half-eaten food suddenly unappetizing. "I've noticed changes too, nothing this extreme, but his behavior in the combat simulations yesterday was off." He trailed off, searching for the right words. "What happened?" I pressed, my heart pounding. He went off script. Ignored the mission parameters completely. Just went through the simulated enemies one by one, tearing them apart. He could have completed the objective in half the time, but he seemed to be, Cale struggled for the right word, finally settling on, enjoying it too much. "We need to tell someone," I insisted, a desperate plea. Who? Cale countered, running a hand through his hair, his brow furrowed with worry. Dr. Thorne already shut you down. Commander Thorne sees Mac as his star pupil. Look, I'll keep an eye on him. Document anything unusual. If we build enough evidence, they'll have to listen. Later that day, the scientists introduced a new combat simulation. A hostage rescue scenario in a complex urban environment. We ran it in pairs, with Mac and Alina taking the first attempt. Alina's arm was still in a cast from the sparring incident, a stark reminder of Mac's uncontrolled aggression. From the observation room, Silas and I watched on monitors as they moved through the scenario. The difference between Alina's methodical, tactical approach and Mac's was stark, horrifying. Where Alina carefully cleared rooms, assessing threats and minimizing collateral damage, Mac simply burst through walls, attacking the armed hostage-takers with his bare hands rather than the provided non-lethal weapons. Jesus, Silas whispered beside me, his voice strained, as Mac literally ripped a mannequin's head from its body. That's not combat, that's butchery. And he's smiling, I added, pointing to the close-up camera feed. Mac's face, captured in high definition, showed pure, unadulterated pleasure as he destroyed everything in his path. When we ran the simulation ourselves, Cale and I completed it with higher efficiency ratings, adhering to all protocols, but ironically with lower threat elimination scores than Mac had achieved. You two think too much, Commander Thorne commented during our debrief, his cold gaze fixed on us. O'Malley acts on instinct, that's what we need in the field, unquestioning, brutal effectiveness. After dinner, Cale caught up with me in the corridor, his face pale, his eyes wide with a quiet desperation. We need to talk, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Not here. We found an empty storage room, rarely used, where the cameras had limited coverage. Something's very wrong with this project, Cale said once we were alone, his voice trembling slightly. Did you see how pale Mac looked at dinner? And his eyes, they're never normal anymore. I tried telling Dr. Thorne. She thinks I'm jealous of his progress. It's not progress, Cale, I said, a chill running down my spine. It's deterioration, and I'm worried the rest of us aren't far behind. Cale leaned closer, his voice dropping to an even lower whisper. My vision's been changing at night. I can see heat signatures, even through walls. And I'm hungry all the time. No matter how much I eat, it's never enough. That could just be the serum's effects, I offered, trying to sound reassuring, though I'd experienced similar changes, a constant, low-level hum of need. Maybe. But what if it's the start of whatever's happening to Mac? Our conversation was interrupted by the facility-wide announcement system. Dr. Thorne's voice, amplified and distorted, echoed through the corridors. Attention all Project Chimera participants. Report to the main laboratory immediately. When we arrived, Alina and Mac were already there. Alina stood at military attention, her face pale, her bandaged arm held stiffly at her side. Mac paced restlessly, his movements jerky and unnatural, like a marionette being pulled by invisible strings. Silas arrived moments after us, his expression guarded, a hint of unease in his eyes. Dr. Thorne stood beside Commander Thorne at the front of the room. On a gleaming steel tray before them were 5 syringes, arranged with unsettling precision. The amber liquid inside was darker than our previous injections, with a reddish tint that hadn't been present before. It pulsed faintly, as if with a life of its own. Gentleman and soldier, Dr. Thorne began, her voice regaining its clinical composure. Your progress has exceeded expectations. Based on your adaptation rates, we're accelerating the timeline. Starting tonight, you'll receive increased dosages of an enhanced formulation of serum omega. Cale stepped forward, his face grim. Ma'am, with respect, shouldn't we complete more stability testing before increasing dosage? Some of us are experiencing side effects. Your concerns are noted, Cale, Commander Thorne interrupted, his voice sharp, cutting. Dr. Thorne's team has analyzed all data and determined this is the appropriate next step. But sir, Cale persisted, his voice rising, the physiological changes are accelerating faster than projected. Perhaps we should. Are you questioning direct orders, soldier? Commander Thorne's voice became very harsh, laced with an undeniable threat. Cale stiffened, his shoulders squaring. No, sir, good, Commander Thorne said, his gaze chillingly dismissive. Because this project is too important for cold feet. He gestured to the syringes. Dr. Thorne, proceed. One by one, we received our injections. The pain was immediate and more intense than before, a searing, white-hot agony that spread through my veins like molten lead. I gripped the medical chair, my knuckles white, my vision blurring. Through the haze of pain, I saw Mac receiving his injection. Unlike the rest of us, fighting to remain composed, gritting our teeth against the torment, he seemed to welcome the burning, his face relaxing into an expression almost like pleasure. A faint, almost imperceptible smile played on his lips. That night, as my body adjusted to the increased dosage, sleep was utterly impossible. My skin felt too tight, stretched taut over rapidly expanding muscles. My senses were overwhelmingly sharp, a constant, agonizing bombardment. The soft noise of the ventilation system sounded like jet engines roaring in my ears. I could smell everyone in the nearby rooms. Their sweat, their breath, the faint, metallic tang of their blood, a scent that now triggered an almost unbearable fascination. I got up to get water from the small sink in my quarters, my movements unnaturally silent. Then I heard voices from the corridor. Moving silently to my door, I pressed my ear against it, my enhanced hearing easily picking up the conversation outside. "Cannot ignore the addiction symptoms, Commander." Dr. Thorne's voice was tense, strained, devoid of its usual clinical detachment. Subject 2's blood work shows molecular restructuring of brain chemistry consistent with dependency. O'Malley is adapting exactly as intended, Commander Thorne replied dismissively, his voice cold, unwavering. Bloodlust was not in the project parameters. Dr. Thorne's voice dropped lower, filled with desperate urgency. The side effects are escalating. If Washington knew, Washington wants results, not excuses, Doctor. Commander Thorne cut her off, his voice edged with steel. The bloodlust can be managed and eventually eliminated in future iterations. But the combat potential we're seeing in Subject 2 is exactly what they're paying for. Their footsteps moved away, receding down the corridor, leaving me frozen by the door, the words echoing in my mind like a death knell. Bloodlust. Addiction managed, eliminated. I kept thinking about those words, connecting them with the horrifying image of Mac drinking from that blood bag. The next morning, a terrible certainty growing in my mind, I approached the others at breakfast, determined to share what I'd overheard. Cale and Alina listened intently, their expressions growing more concerned than horrified with each word. Silas, however, shook his head in disbelief, his casted arm cradled protectively against his chest, a stark reminder of Mac's brutality. Making this up," he accused, his voice flat, his eyes fixed on his plate. "Mac is just adapting better than the rest of us. You can't handle that he's the best." "This isn't about who's best," I insisted, my voice rising in frustration. "Something's happening to him, to all of us. The serum isn't stable." "Arthur's right," Cale added, his gaze fixed on Silas. "Haven't you noticed the changes, the mood swings, the hunger? All I see is Arthur trying to sabotage Mac because he can't keep up," Silas said, standing abruptly, grabbing his tray. "I'm going to train with someone who isn't spreading paranoia." He walked away, leaving a silence thick with tension. Cale sighed heavily. "He won't listen. He and Mac were close before all this. And Mac is getting worse," I said, my voice grim. "Who knows what the increased dosage will do to him, to all of us." "To all of us," Alina corrected quietly, pushing away her half-eaten breakfast, her face drawn. "I haven't told anyone, but I've been having dreams, violent ones. I wake up wanting to hunt, to tear things apart with my bare hands." We fell silent as Mac entered the cafeteria. He filled a tray with triple portions, piling food high, then sat alone in the corner. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor, the veins beneath it dark and prominent, like angry rivers. As he ate rapidly and systematically, his eyes constantly scanned the room, black pools of predatory awareness, assessing, judging like a predator assessing prey. The atmosphere in the facility had changed completely. What had begun with camaraderie and shared purpose now seemed dangerous, tinged with a palpable threat. 5 men and women, changing into something else entirely, scientists pushing boundaries without concern for consequences. And at the center of it all, Mac, Commander Thorne's star subject, becoming something less human with each passing day. Underneath it all, a terrible certainty was growing in my mind. This was only the beginning of our nightmare 3 weeks after I'd caught Mac drinking blood. The memory haunted me every night as I lay awake, listening for movement in the corridors. That terrible certainty that we were headed toward disaster grew stronger each day. Mac continued to deteriorate before our eyes, his humanity slipping away in small, terrifying increments that the scientists either couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge. Commander Thorne, in fact, seemed to relish it. Commander Thorne announced a combat readiness test for that morning. The obstacle course had been modified, transforming it into a labyrinth of danger. with automated opponents' combat drones programmed to simulate enemy combatants. We gathered at the entrance in our tactical gear, checking our weapons, loaded with non-lethal training rounds. Mac arrived last. The changes in him were shocking, profound. Veins pulsed visibly beneath his grayish skin, like dark ropes beneath parchment. His muscles had continued to grow disproportionately, straining against his uniform, distending the fabric. But his eyes bothered me most. They were completely black now, with no visible iris, constantly scanning, never blinking, like obsidian chips embedded in his skull. "Everyone clear on the objective?" Cale asked, maintaining his leadership role, his voice betraying no hint of the tension we all felt. "We neutralize all targets and extract the intelligence package from the central building." Silas nodded eagerly. "Simple enough." Elena caught my eye with a worried look. We both noticed how Mac kept staring at Cale's throat as he spoke, an almost imperceptible flexing of his jaw. "Let's establish positions," Cale continued, oblivious to Mac's predatory gaze. "Mac, you take point. Silas, back him up. Arthur and Elena, you take the flanks. Keep radio contact at all times." "Copy that. Copy that," I replied, grateful to be positioned away from Mac. Commander Thorne watched from the observation deck above, Dr. Thorne at his side with her tablet, her face unreadable. "Begin on my mark," his voice announced through the speakers, resonating with a chilling finality. 3, 2, 1, execute. We entered the course at a run. It was designed like a small village, with prefabricated buildings, narrow alleyways, and strategic choke points. Automated opponents, metallic humanoid figures on treaded bases, patrolled with sensor arrays that would register our presence. For the first 15 minutes, everything proceeded according to plan. Mac moved with frightening efficiency, a blur of motion, disabling drones before they could even register his presence. I took out 3 targets on my assigned route, surprised at how easily I anticipated their movements, how time seemed to slow when I aimed, every decision made with pinpoint accuracy. "Central building secured." Silas's voice crackled over the radio, filled with his usual calm competence. "Moving to extract the package." "Copy that, Silas," Cale responded, his voice clear. "Arthur, Elena, converge on the central building to provide." The radio erupted with screaming. Not the controlled shouting of combat, the practiced yells of engagement. This was primal, agonizing, the sound of a man dying in pain. "Cale, report." I called into my radio, my heart seizing in my chest. "Silas, Mac." "What's happening?" Only more screaming answered, then a wet, gurgling sound that turned my blood cold. "Arthur, east side." Elena's voice was tense but controlled, strained with effort. "I'm approaching from the west." I sprinted toward the central building, vaulting a concrete barrier with ease, my enhanced strength making the obstacle trivial. The heavy steel door had been ripped from its hinges, twisted and mangled like wet paper. Inside, the lights flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows. The screaming had stopped. I moved silently through the entrance hall, weapon raised, the non-lethal rounds suddenly feeling woefully inadequate. A wet, tearing sound came from the main room ahead, followed by a muffled, sickening crunch rounding the corner. I froze, the scene before me burning itself into my memory with horrifying clarity. Cale lay on his back, eyes open and empty, staring sightlessly at the ceiling. His throat was a mangled cavity, his chest a bloody ruin. Mac straddled him, hands and face covered in gore. He wasn't just killing Cale. He was feeding on him, tearing chunks from his neck and shoulders with teeth that had elongated into points, grotesque, needle-sharp fangs. "Mac!" Silas's shout came from the other side of the room. He stood with his weapon raised, his face a mask of shock and horror. "Stop! What the hell are you doing?" Mac's head snapped up, his face barely recognizable beneath the mask of blood. He moved with blinding speed, crossing the room before Silas could fire. One hand gripped Silas's weapon, crushing the barrel with terrifying ease. The other seized his neck. "No," Silas managed, a strangled cry, before Mac twisted with a sickening crack. Silas's body crumpled to the floor. Instantly lifeless, Mac turned toward me, his black eyes finding mine with chilling precision. Blood dripped from his mouth as his lips pulled back in what might have been a smile, revealing those elongated fangs. "Hungry," he rasped, his voice no longer human, a guttural growl that reverberated in the air. "So hungry, Arthur. Your blood smells right." I backed away, raising my weapon, my hands trembling despite my enhanced strength. "Mac, this isn't you, it's the serum. We can get you help." He tilted his head, studying me like a curious predator assessing its next meal. Help, no help, only hunger, only blood. He took a step forward, his movements fluid, unnervingly graceful. Your blood smells, right, a movement in my peripheral vision. Elena had arrived at the other entrance, taking in the carnage with wide, horrified eyes. Arthur, she whispered, her voice barely audible, we need to go, now. Mac's head swiveled toward Elena's voice, distracted for a split second. In that instant, I fired 3 rounds into his chest. The impacts barely staggered him, eliciting only a low growl of annoyance. Run, I shouted to Elena, turning to flee down the corridor. Elena followed close behind, her footsteps a blur. Emergency protocol, she gasped, her breath ragged. Button by the main entrance. We sprinted through the maze of hallways, the sound of Mac's enraged roar echoing behind us, a sound no human throat should produce. The very walls shook with the force of his pursuit, concrete cracking under his monstrous footsteps, metal bending as he tore through obstacles. We reached the main entrance, slamming our hands against the emergency button. Sirens wailed, piercing the air, as steel barriers began descending from the ceiling, sealing off the main facility. Security team. Code red, I shouted into my radio, my voice raw with desperation. Mac has gone hostile. Kale and Silas are down. Repeat, Kale and Silas are dead. Elena is injured, the radio crackled. Copy that. Containment protocol initiated. Gas deployment in progress. White vapor began pouring from vents in the ceiling, a ghostly, swirling fog. We backed away from the sealed entrance as the sound of Mac's approach grew louder, more frantic. This way, a security officer's voice cut through the chaos from a side door, partially ajar. Evacuation route. We stumbled through, gasping as the door sealed behind us with a pneumatic hiss. Through a reinforced window, I watched the corridor fill with gas. Mac burst into view, moving on all fours now, his movements animalistic, terrifyingly efficient. The gas swirled around him as he sniffed the air, his black eyes finding us through the window. He slammed against it, the impact spiderwebbing the supposedly unbreakable glass. It's not holding him, Elena whispered in horror, her face ghostly pale in the emergency lighting. Another impact. The cracks spread, branching out like jagged lightning. The security team arrived, firing tranquilizer rounds. Mac roared in fury, a sound of unholy rage, turning to face this new threat. The darts stuck in his gray, leathery skin like porcupine quills. 1, 2, 6, a dozen. He staggered, swinging wildly at his attackers, catching one man with a blow that sent him flying across the room, crumpling against a wall with a sickening thud. Finally, Mac's movement slowed. He dropped to his knees, then fell forward, his body twitching as the sedatives overwhelmed even his enhanced system. Jesus Christ, someone whispered behind me. Commander Thorne pushed through the gathered security personnel, his face pale, his jaw clenched, as he surveyed the scene through the window. Get him to containment, he ordered, pointing at Mac's unconscious body. Maximum security protocols, and get a cleanup team to the testing area. Dr. Thorne appeared at his side, her professional composure cracked for the first time since I'd known her, her face ashen. Commander, I warned you about the molecular instability. The blood hunger was a documented risk factor in the preliminary trials. Not now, Doctor, Commander Thorne snapped, his eyes flashing with controlled fury. He turned to us, his gaze sweeping over Elena and me. Vance Petrova, Medical Bay, immediately. Sir, Kale and Silas are dead, I said, my voice shaking with rage and shock. Mac killed them. He was eating Kale. This whole project is a disaster. We need to shut it down before. You need to follow orders, soldier. Commander Thorne cut me off, his cold eyes holding no grief, only cold, calculating resolve. Medical now. Guards escorted us to the medical bay, their weapons held ready, their faces impassive. My mind raced, reeling with images I knew would never leave me. Kale's vacant eyes, Silas's neck snapping, Mac's blood-covered face with those pointed teeth. Dr. Thorne entered shortly after, her face unreadable once more. She approached with 2 syringes, their contents a shimmering liquid. What is that? Elena demanded, backing away, her hand instinctively reaching for the non-existent knife she usually carried. A sedative, Dr. Thorne replied evenly, her voice regaining its clinical composure. You've experienced severe trauma. Your enhanced physiologies require specialized medication. No more injections, I said firmly, my voice unwavering. No more serums, this ends now. Her expression hardened. This isn't optional, Vance. She nodded to the guards who moved to restrain us. I considered fighting. With my enhanced strength, I could probably overpower them, but then what? We were miles from civilization, in the desolate Alaskan wilderness. Even with our capabilities, escape seemed impossible. The needle slid into my arm. Darkness crowded the edges of my vision almost immediately. "You should have listened," I murmured as consciousness faded, the last thought reverberating in my mind. Now we're all monsters. I dreamed of blood, rivers of it flowing through sterile corridors. Mac swimming through it, his body twisting, transforming into something inhuman. Kale and Sila's floating face down, their bodies emptied, hollowed out. 3 days passed before I awoke fully. My head pounded with a dull ache as I tried to sit up, finding myself strapped to the bed, thick, reinforced bonds securing my wrists and ankles. "Easy," Kale's voice came from nearby. I turned to see him in a similar bed, though his restraints had been removed. "They've been keeping us sedated." "Elena, Sila's, Mac?" I asked, though I already knew the answer, a cold dread twisting in my gut. "Dead," Kale said, his face haggard, his eyes haunted, reflecting the nightmare he'd endured. "They told me yesterday when I woke up. They're calling it a psychological break triggered by the serum." I struggled against my restraints. "And Mac, contained, that's all they'll say." The door opened, admitting Commander Thorne, followed by Dr. Thorne and 2 armed guards. "Release him," Commander Thorne ordered, gesturing to my restraints. Once I was free, he pulled up a chair between our beds, his gaze sweeping over us, assessing. "I'll be direct. What happened was unfortunate, but not entirely unexpected. Every breakthrough has casualties. The casual dismissal of Kale and Silas's deaths, the utter lack of remorse, made rage surge through me, hot and bitter. Casualties. Mac tore them apart. He was eating them. A severe adverse reaction to the original formula, Dr. Thorne interjected, not meeting my eyes, her voice devoid of emotion. Serum Omega contained elements that triggered predatory responses in O'Malley's brain chemistry. The protein binding was unstable. And you knew this was possible, I accused, my voice raw with fury. "I heard you talking about bloodlust weeks ago," Commander Thorne's expression hardened. "Every military advancement carries risk, Vance. The atomic bomb killed its share of scientists during development. What happened to your team was regrettable, but the data collected from Subject 2 has proven invaluable." "So what now?" Kale asked quietly, resignation in his voice. "You quarantine us until we start eating people too." "No," Commander Thorne leaned forward, his voice chillingly calm. "Project Chimera continues, with modifications. Dr. Thorne has developed Serum Omega II, an improved formula that eliminates the unfortunate side effects O'Malley experienced." I stared at him in disbelief. "You can't be serious. After what happened?" "Deadly serious, Vance. The project is too valuable to abandon. Serum Omega II uses a different molecular binding agent that prevents the deterioration of frontal lobe function, while maintaining enhanced physical capabilities." "And if we refuse?" I challenged, my jaw tight. Commander Thorne's smile didn't reach his eyes. "That's not an option. You signed the consent forms. The military has invested millions in your development, and now, with 3 subjects lost, you and Dubois are even more valuable." "Lost?" Kale's voice rose, cracking with anguish. "Kale and Silas were murdered by Mac, by what your serum turned him into." "A tragedy," Commander Thorne agreed, without an ounce of sincerity. "But O'Malley's reaction was extreme, an outlier. The data from his case has proven invaluable in refining the formula." I looked to Dr. Thorne, searching for any sign of human decency, any flicker of guilt in her cold eyes. "Doctor, you can't continue this. You've seen what the serum does." Something flickered in her eyes, doubt perhaps, even guilt, before her clinical mask returned. "Serum Omega II is fundamentally different, Vance. We've corrected the flaws." "When?" Kale asked, resignation heavy in his voice. "Tomorrow morning," Commander Thorne replied, standing. "The facility is now under elevated security. Military police have been stationed at all exits. All communications are restricted. This is for your protection as much as operational security." After they left, Kale and I sat in silence for several minutes. "We're prisoners," I finally said, the words bitter on my tongue. Kale nodded, his gaze fixed on the reinforced door. "We always were, we just didn't know it." He ran a hand through his hair. "I don't trust this Serum Omega II. Even if it works better, they're still experimenting on us." I looked at the reinforced door, the cameras in each corner of the room, silently observing. "Do we have a choice?" Kale met my gaze, his eyes mirroring my despair. "Not right now." The next morning, we were escorted to the main laboratory. The facility had changed overnight. Armed military police stood at every junction, their faces grim, their weapons held ready. The research staff avoided eye contact as we passed, moving quickly through the halls like ghosts. In the lab, Dr. Thorne waited, 2 syringes containing a clearer liquid than the amber serum Omega-I. Serum Omega-II represents a complete redesign, she explained, her voice devoid of inflection, as technicians prepared our arms. The binding agent prevents neural deterioration while enhancing physical capabilities beyond what Serum Omega-I achieved. Will it make us want to eat people? I asked bluntly, my voice flat, her jaw tightened imperceptibly. No, the protein structure that triggered the predatory response has been eliminated. And Mac, Cale asked, his voice low. What happens to him? A shadow crossed her face, fleeting. Subject 2 is providing valuable data for future iterations. The injection hurt worse than the first. My veins turned to fire, muscles spasming so violently the restraints barely held. I bit through my lip, the metallic taste of blood filling my mouth, trying not to scream. Beside me, Cale convulsed, blood trickling from his nose, his eyes wide with silent agony. When the pain finally subsided, hours had passed. Unlike the euphoria that followed Serum Omega-I, Serum Omega-II left me feeling hollow, like my insides had been scooped out and replaced with something foreign, a profound emptiness that vibrated just beneath the surface of my skin. Over the next 3 days, the changes became apparent, frightening in their scope. My strength doubled compared to Serum Omega-I. I could bend steel with my bare hands as if it were soft clay. I ran at speeds approaching 60 miles per hour without fatigue. My senses sharpened even further. I could hear conversations 3 rooms away, distinguish individual heartbeats in a crowded corridor. I could see in near total darkness, my vision adapting, picking up minute details. But the hunger remained absent, that specific, horrifying craving for blood. No predatory impulses toward others. Just a constant, gnawing emptiness that no amount of food could satisfy. It was a hunger for something, undefined. 1 week after receiving Serum Omega-II, I convinced a guard to let me see Mac. I need closure, I insisted, my voice tight with a suppressed urgency. I need to understand what happened to my friends. The guard hesitated then, perhaps swayed by Dr. Thorne's unseen hand, escorted me to a reinforced door in the facility's lowest level. 5 minutes, he said, swiping his key card. Doctor's orders. The observation room overlooked a steel-walled chamber, stark and utilitarian. In the center, strapped to a reinforced table with thick titanium restraints, lay what had once been Mac O'Malley. I barely recognized him. His skin had turned completely gray, leathery and thick, muscles bulging unnaturally beneath it, distended and grotesque. His jaw had elongated, pushing forward, accommodating teeth that no longer fit in a human mouth, sharp, pointed things designed for tearing flesh, arranged in jagged rows. His fingers had extended into clawed appendages that constantly flexed against their restraints, seeking something to grasp, to rip. 2 scientists in hazmat suits, their faces obscured by clear visors, extracted samples, blood, tissue, spinal fluid, from his restrained body with chilling detachment. Mac's black eyes, utterly devoid of humanity, followed their movements like a predator. When one scientist moved closer to adjust an IV, Mac lunged against his restraints with such force the entire table shuddered, the thick titanium groaning in protest. Incredible adaptation rate, a technician murmured beside me, making notes on his tablet, his voice a low hum. Complete physiological restructuring to optimize predation. That was my friend, I said quietly, my voice raw. The technician glanced at me, his gaze emotionless behind the visor, then back at his tablet. That was Subject 2, the most successful Serum Omega-I recipient in terms of physical enhancement. The psychological deterioration is unfortunate, but informative. His case provided invaluable data for the refinement process. Through the reinforced glass, Mac's head suddenly turned, his black eyes finding mine with uncanny precision, despite the one-way mirror. A smile, a horrific stretching of his inhuman face, spread across his features, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. Arthur, he mouthed, the word clear, despite the barrier between us. His lips formed another word chillingly, perfectly. Soon I stumbled back, chilled to the bone. Fascinating, the technician noted, making another scribble. He still recognizes former team members. I left without another word, the image of Mac burned into my mind. That thing on the table wasn't my teammate anymore. It was something else entirely, something abominable, created by human arrogance and military ambition. And the most terrifying thought of all, with Serum Omega-II coursing through my veins, How long until I became something just as inhuman, just as monstrous? Was that gnawing emptiness I felt simply a different kind of hunger? That night, I lay awake in my quarters, staring at the ceiling, every nerve on edge. Down the hall, I could hear Cale pacing restlessly in his room. Neither of us had spoken much since seeing what remained of Mac. The weight of our situation pressed down on us, crushing. We had become something more than human, but at what cost? Cale and Silas were dead. Mac had transformed into a creature out of nightmares, and we continued changing day by day under the watchful eyes of scientists who viewed us not as men, but as experiments, as data points. Dr. Thorne's words echoed in my mind. Serum Omega II is fundamentally different. Maybe she was right. Maybe we wouldn't develop the bloodlust that consumed Mac. But as I felt the terrifying power running through my enhanced body, that profound, unshakable emptiness at my core, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had crossed a line, a terrifying threshold that humanity was never meant to cross. We were instruments, perfected weapons, but for what ultimate, horrifying purpose? 6 weeks passed in a blur of testing and adaptation. The hollow feeling from Serum Omega II never fully disappeared, but my body transformed in ways that made even my previous enhancements seem trivial. I could now bend steel as easily as folding paper and run at speeds approaching 60 miles per hour without breaking a sweat. My senses had sharpened to nearly supernatural levels. I could hear conversations 3 rooms away, distinguish individual heartbeats in a crowded corridor, and detect the unique scent signature of everyone in the facility. Cale experienced similar changes. We trained together daily, pushing boundaries that shouldn't have been possible for human beings to cross. Through it all, we spoke little about what had happened, about Cale and Silas, about the thing that Mac had become. Our silence was an unspoken agreement: survive now, process later. The results are extraordinary, Commander Thorne announced during our morning briefing, reviewing our latest test metrics with poorly concealed satisfaction. Serum Omega II has surpassed all performance projections without the complications of the original formula. Dr. Thorne stood beside him, dark circles shadowing her eyes, and a new nervous tic had developed. She constantly checked the security monitors visible from the briefing room, as if expecting something to burst through the walls. The molecular stability remains consistent, she reported, her voice flat and clinical. No signs of neural deterioration or aggressive impulse enhancement in either subject. Subject, not soldier, not person. The dehumanization was subtle but deliberate. What about Mac? I asked, interrupting their self-congratulation, my voice cutting through the sterile air. Any changes in his condition? Commander Thorne's jaw tightened. Subject 2's status is not your concern, Vance. He killed my friends, I said, meeting his cold stare, refusing to back down. I think that makes it my concern. After a tense silence, Dr. Thorne sighed. O'Malley's condition continues to progress along expected lines. The biological samples we've collected are proving invaluable for understanding the Serum Omega II deterioration process. You're still harvesting parts of him, Cale said, disgust evident in his voice, his face blanching. Even though he's basically not human anymore, that's enough, Dubois, Commander Thorne snapped, his voice like cracking ice. You both have a new assignment. Report to equipment in 30 minutes. After they left, Cale turned to me, his eyes filled with a desperate weariness. They're going to keep us here forever, aren't they? Lab rats, until we either die or turn into whatever Mac is becoming. I nodded, keeping my voice low. Unless we find a way out. The armed escorts arrived precisely on time, leading us to the equipment room where tactical gear awaited. The briefing was simple. Infiltrate a mock terrorist compound constructed about 100 miles from the main facility, neutralize all opposition forces, played by military personnel with simulation weapons, and extract a case containing intelligence materials. This will be your first field test beyond the facility boundary, Commander Thorne explained, spreading a topographical map on the table. The compound is here in this valley. Under normal circumstances, it would require a full squad and nearly 2 days to reach the location and complete the objective. He looked up, studying us with calculating eyes, a hint of something chilling in their depths. I expect you to complete it in under 12 hours. The trek to the target location would have been grueling for normal humans. Rugged mountain terrain, dense forest, and steep ravines under the harsh Alaskan elements. For us, it was almost effortless. Cale and I moved through the wilderness with supernatural speed and agility, covering ground that should have taken days in mere hours. This still feels wrong, Cale said, as we paused on a ridge overlooking the mock compound. The facility below consisted of several prefabricated buildings arranged in a defensive perimeter, with armed personnel patrolling the grounds. These abilities, they're not meant for humans to have. I studied the compound through binoculars, mapping patrol patterns and identifying entry points, the intricate details of their defenses instantly clear to my enhanced perception. Too late to worry about that now, I murmured. We are what they made us. And what exactly is that? Cale asked quietly, his voice laced with a subtle dread. Because sometimes I catch myself thinking like a predator. I watch people move and I see targets, prey. He looked at his hands, clenching and unclenching them. The bloodlust may not be there, but something else is taking its place. I lowered the binoculars, unable to admit I had felt the same changes, that same chilling shift in perspective. Let's just get this done and get back, one problem at a time. We infiltrated the compound with disquieting ease. The soldiers playing opposition forces never stood a chance. Their movement seemed painfully slow to our enhanced perception, their tactics predictable and ineffective. We neutralized 23 hostiles in under 7 minutes, moving through the compound like ghosts, silent and deadly. No bullets, no weapons beyond our hands and bodies. Just quick, precise strikes that rendered men unconscious before they even realized we were there. I located the intelligence package in a reinforced safe that I tore open like cardboard, the metal peeling away with a groan of protest. Inside was a metal briefcase containing nothing but a note from Commander Thorne, "Test complete. Return to base." The entire exercise had taken less than 4 hours from deployment to completion. We made the return journey in silence, both processing the chilling implications of what we had become. By any military standard, we were the perfect weapons, faster, stronger, and more lethal than any normal human could hope to match. And there were only 2 of us. What would an army of enhanced soldiers like us mean for warfare? The thought was terrifying. 3 days later, we approached the facility perimeter in the pre-dawn light. Something felt wrong immediately. The security checkpoint at the main entrance stood abandoned, its windows shattered and door hanging ajar. "Stay alert," I whispered to Cale, though I didn't need to. His posture had already changed to combat readiness, his eyes scanning for threats. We entered the checkpoint cautiously. Blood spattered the walls and pooled on the floor, already dry and darkening. No bodies, just the undeniable evidence of horrific violence. The security monitors displayed static, a snowy, flickering chaos, and the communication system remained silent, despite my attempts to contact the main facility. "Emergency power," Cale noted, pointing to the red auxiliary lights that cast the corridor in a bloody, surreal glow. Something triggered the lockdown protocol. We both knew what, or more accurately, who that something likely was. The main entrance required both key card and biometric authentication. With the systems compromised, I had to force the doors open, metal groaning and screeching as I pried them apart with my enhanced strength. Beyond lay a nightmare. The corridors of the facility had become a slaughterhouse. Bloody handprints marked walls where people had tried to flee, desperate, futile attempts at escape. Spent shell casings littered the floor near defensive positions that had proved useless. And the bodies, or what remained of them. The first researcher we found lay sprawled in the corridor leading to the laboratories, his chest cavity torn open and emptied. Not just killed, but consumed. The second and third we discovered in similar states in adjacent offices, their remains mutilated beyond recognition. None had bullet wounds. Whatever killed them had used claws and teeth, tearing flesh with brutal efficiency. "Mac," Cale whispered, his face pale despite his enhanced constitution, a grim understanding dawning in his eyes. We moved deeper into the facility, following the undeniable trail of carnage. In the main laboratory, 5 more bodies lay in various states of dismemberment. Blood had been splashed across equipment and walls in arterial sprays, and deep gouges marked the metal tables where something with inhuman strength had torn through them. "We need to find any survivors," Cale said, though his tone suggested he didn't expect any. The control room door had been ripped from its hinges and thrown across the room, bent and twisted. Inside, the command center had been utterly destroyed, monitors smashed, equipment crushed, wires ripped from their conduits. And in the center of it all, Dr. Thorne and Commander Thorne, or what was left of them. Commander Thorne lay face up, his chest and abdomen torn apart, rib cage splayed open like grotesque wings. Dr. Thorne's body had been positioned beside him, her head twisted at an impossible angle, eyes open in a final expression of terror. Unlike the others, they hadn't just been killed for sustenance. The arrangement of their bodies suggested something more deliberate, almost ritualistic. A message. Jesus, Cale breathed, a horrified whisper. He didn't just kill them. He wanted them to suffer. I moved to the single intact monitor, still displaying feeds from the facility security cameras. The system automatically archived footage, and with trembling fingers, I rewound to see what had happened. The recording showed Mac in his containment cell, strapped to the reinforced table as usual. Two scientists in hazmat suits were extracting samples when something changed in Mac's demeanor. He went completely still, then began straining against his restraints with renewed purpose. The titanium bands designed to hold him, the same ones that had held me, began to bend, then snap, one by one, with terrifying pops of protesting metal. The scientists backed away, hitting emergency buttons, but it was too late. Mac tore free, his movement inhumanly fast. He seized the first scientist, ripping through the hazmat suit to tear out the man's throat. The second tried to flee, but Mac pounced with animal speed, dragging him down. What followed was too graphic to watch without turning away, but I forced myself to witness it. Mac fed on both men, growing stronger, more vital with each gruesome feeding. Then he looked directly at the camera, a chilling, triumphant smile stretching his blood-stained face, and moved with purpose toward the exit. The subsequent footage showed his methodical hunt through the facility. He didn't just kill. He stalked, ambushed, and toyed with his prey. The security teams, armed with lethal force, fired hundreds of rounds with little effect. Tranquilizer darts bounced off his gray, leathery skin as if it were armor. He moved through their defenses like they weren't there, his body now completely transformed from anything human, a true monster unleashed. The last clip showed him cornering Dr. Thorne and Commander Thorne in the control room. Their deaths had not been quick. He's still here, Cale whispered, reading my thoughts, his voice barely a breath. And now he's hunting us. A soft thump from the ventilation duct above us confirmed his words. Something large moved through the air system, metal groaning under its weight. We need to get out, I said, backing toward the door. Now, we sprinted down the corridor toward the nearest exit, but a crash from ahead stopped us. A vent cover flew across the hallway, bent and twisted, followed by a shape that dropped to the floor in a predatory crouch. I barely recognized what had once been Mac O'Malley. His body had transformed completely. Gray, leathery skin stretched over hugely enlarged muscles, elongated limbs ending in clawed hands, and a face that had restructured itself for feeding, his jaw extended forward, filled with pointed teeth arranged in multiple rows. The only human feature that remained were his eyes, still completely black, but now filled with a malevolent, ancient intelligence. Arthur, the creature rasped, its voice a distorted, guttural version of Mac's, thick with a terrible hunger. Cale, brothers, finally, Mac, I said, trying to keep my voice steady to find the man beneath the monster. This isn't you. The serum did this. He tilted his head, studying us like curious specimens, like scientific experiments. No, this is me, true you too, soon. He inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring, scenting the air. I smell it in your blood, different but same, beneath, just sleeping. He took a step forward, his movements deliberate, terrifying. Been waiting, making ready, need you both to complete. Complete what? Cale asked, positioning himself slightly in front of me, his body tensing, ready to spring. Mac smiled, a horrific stretching of his transformed face, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. The becoming, your blood, his blood, my blood, all together. He lunged with blinding speed. A horrifying blur. Cale shoved me aside with enhanced strength, placing himself directly in Mac's path. I crashed into the wall, hitting it with bone-jarring force, as Mac collided with Cale, both of them tumbling to the floor in a blur of movement, a tangle of limbs. Cale fought with everything Serum Omega II had given him, strength, speed, combat instincts, but Mac had transformed beyond even our enhancements. His clawed hands tore through Cale's tactical gear and into flesh, ripping and tearing with each strike. Run, Cale shouted, blood spraying from his mouth as Mac's teeth sank into his shoulder. Arthur. Go. I hesitated for one terrible second, torn between helping my last teammate and the terrifying certainty that we both would die if I stayed. Then training and survival instinct took over. I turned and ran, using every ounce of my enhanced speed, my muscles burning, pushing past the pain. Behind me, Cale's screams turned to wet gurgling sounds, then silence. I raced through the facility's corridors, sealing emergency doors behind me. Each barrier bought me seconds, nothing more. I needed to get out to escape before Mac finished with Kale and came for me. As I rounded the corner to the east exit, I caught a glimpse of movement in the reflection of a shattered glass panel. Mac moved along the ceiling, his transformed body clinging to the surface like a monstrous insect, pursuing me with a single-minded, predatory purpose. I crashed through the emergency exit into the biting Alaskan dawn, the cold air shocking my lungs. The perimeter fence stood ahead, 12 feet of reinforced steel topped with razor wire, nothing to an enhanced soldier. I cleared it in a single bound, landing silently in the snow beyond. A roar echoed from the facility behind me, rage and hunger mixed in an inhuman sound that carried across the frozen landscape. I didn't look back. I ran, pushing my enhanced body to its absolute limits, knowing that what pursued me was no longer my teammate or even a man. The facility had become a slaughterhouse. Everyone was dead: researchers, security, Commander Thorne, Dr. Thorne, and now Kale. I was the only survivor, carrying in my veins the same substance that had turned Mac into a monster metal groaned under tremendous pressure as I sealed the final emergency bulkhead. Mac's inhuman roar echoed through the ventilation system, making the overhead lights flicker. I'd managed to lure him to the lower levels by activating emergency protocols throughout different sections of the facility, creating a maze that even his predatory instincts couldn't navigate quickly enough. Containment Protocol Alpha 7 engaged, announced the automated system, its voice calm, devoid of panic, as steel barriers descended from the ceiling. Biohazard quarantine active. The pounding started immediately. Mac slammed against the reinforced doors with such force that the wall shuddered, each impact sounding louder than the last. "Hold," I whispered to the barrier, my breath ragged. "Just hold." I didn't have much time. Everyone in the facility was dead. The image of Kale's final moments flashed in my mind, his blood spraying across the corridor wall as Mac tore into him. I pushed the memory away. Grief would have to wait. Moving quickly through the blood-spattered corridors, I headed for the main laboratory. The room had been destroyed in Mac's rampage, but the secure storage units remained intact. I broke open the biometric lock with a single punch, tearing through metal that would have been impenetrable to normal human strength. Inside, I found what I needed: vials of serum omega-I and serum omega-II, meticulously labeled tissue samples, and hard drives containing decades of research data. I stuffed everything into a backpack. In Dr. Thorne's office, I found her personal tablet, still logged into the system. It contained video logs of the entire project, from subject selection to the final, horrifying transformation of Mac. I added it to my collection. A particularly violent crash echoed through the facility, followed by the blaring of alarms. Warning: containment breach detected in Sector 4. Initiating secondary containment protocols. Mac was breaking through. The facility had been designed to contain biohazards, not super soldiers turned monsters. I needed to move faster. In the security office, I downloaded surveillance footage onto portable drives, capturing everything from our arrival months ago to Mac's escape and subsequent massacre. The evidence in my backpack was damning proof of military experimentation gone horribly wrong. Another crash, closer this time. The ventilation ducts above me creaked as something heavy moved through them. I grabbed my backpack and ran for the emergency exit on the east side of the facility, the one furthest from Mac's last known position. The exit required a key card I didn't have, so I simply tore the door from its frame. Cold Alaskan air hit me forcefully as I stepped outside. The facility had been built into the side of a mountain, surrounded by wilderness in all directions. The nearest town was over 100 miles away. Behind me, another alarm sounded. Mac had broken through another containment level. I didn't look back as I sprinted into the forest, my enhanced body moving at speeds no normal human could match. Even with my advantages, Mac would be faster, stronger. My only hope was distance and the continued functioning of the remaining containment barriers. The Alaskan wilderness in winter was extremely dangerous. Temperatures dropped to -30 degrees Fahrenheit. Snow lay thick on the ground. Predators roamed freely. An ordinary person wouldn't survive for more than a few hours. For me, it was helpful. The harsh conditions might slow even Mac if he managed to escape the facility's failing containment. I ran through the first day without stopping, pushing my enhanced body to its limits, putting miles between myself and the facility. My enhanced physiology burned energy at an alarming rate, but I couldn't stop. Each time I considered resting, I remembered the sound of Mac moving through the ventilation ducts, the wet tearing sound as he fed on Kalebi the second day. Hunger and exhaustion began to affect even my enhanced body. I'd crossed mountains, forded half-frozen rivers, and navigated dense forests, relying on my heightened senses to avoid hazards. The backpack containing the evidence felt heavier with each step, a leaden weight on my shoulders. I forced myself to keep moving, using trees for support when my legs threatened to give out. As night fell on the second day, I finally collapsed against the trunk of a massive pine, my body having reached its absolute limit. I pulled the backpack close, protecting the evidence even as I passed out from sheer exhaustion. In the distance, I heard the rhythmic thumping of helicopter rotors, a faint, unsettling drone, but couldn't tell if it was real or a hallucination before I blacked out entirely. I awoke to bright lights and the sterile, metallic smell of a medical facility. Restraints secured my wrists and ankles to the bed, thick, reinforced bonds that might actually hold someone with my strength. An IV dripped clear fluid into my arm, and monitoring equipment surrounded the bed, beeping softly. Men in military uniforms stood guard by the door, their faces impassive. "He's awake," one of them spoke into a radio. "Get the general." "Where am I?" I asked, my voice hoarse, my throat dry. "Where's my backpack?" Neither guard answered, their faces impassive behind mirrored sunglasses. Minutes passed in intense silence before the door opened, admitting a doctor in a white coat, followed by a stern-faced man with silver hair and a chest full of medals. "Sergeant Vance," the older man said, pulling up a chair beside my bed, his voice gravelly, authoritative. "I'm General Marcus Harding. You've caused quite a situation." The doctor checked my vitals with clinical efficiency, drawing yet another vial of blood from my arm. I'd been poked and prodded so many times over the past months that the needle barely registered anymore. "The facility," I said, struggling against the restraints, my muscles screaming in protest. "There's a creature there, Mac O'Malley. He killed everyone." General Harding's expression didn't change. "We've sent a team to assess the situation. The facility has been secured." He leaned forward, his hands clasped, his gaze piercing. "What I need from you now is a full account of what happened." I told him everything. The serum Omega-I injections, Mac's horrifying deterioration, the massacre, my escape. As I spoke, I watched their reactions closely. The doctor occasionally glanced at Harding, who maintained a perfect poker face throughout, his eyes betraying nothing. "And the others?" I asked when I finished, my voice cracking with emotion. "Kalen Dubois, Sila's thorn. Elena Petrova, training accident," General Harding replied smoothly, his voice devoid of emotion. "A regrettable loss of life during a classified military exercise." I was shocked by the casual dismissal, the utter callousness. "Training accident, that's the story you're going with. They were torn apart. The serum turned Mac into a monster, and he slaughtered them." Harding signaled to the doctor, who quietly left the room. Once the door closed, the general's demeanor changed, becoming cold and calculating. "Sergeant, let me be perfectly clear about your situation. Project Chimera was a classified military operation at the highest level. The events you described, while unfortunate, fall under national security protocols. People need to know," I insisted, desperation coloring my voice. "Know what happened, what the military was doing. Creating super soldiers that turn into monsters. The evidence in your backpack has been confiscated and secured," Harding finished for me, a thin, humorless smile playing on his lips. "As have you. For weeks, they kept me in isolation. Different doctors conducted tests daily, blood draws, muscle biopsies, stress tests to measure my enhanced capabilities. They never used names, referring to me only as the subject during their clinical discussions. They ignored my protests, my demands to speak to anyone outside the facility. I was a prisoner in all but name, kept alive only because my body contained valuable military secrets. One morning, about 3 weeks after my rescue, 2 MPS escorted me to a conference room where General Harding waited with several officials in expensive suits. "Sit down, Vance," Harding gestured to an empty chair across from him. "We need to discuss your future." I remained standing, my gaze fixed on him. "Am I under arrest?" "That depends entirely on you," one of the suits replied, his voice smooth, unctuous. "I'm Richard Sterling, Department of Defense. We've reviewed your statement regarding Project Chimera." "And?" I asked, my voice flat. "And it presents a significant problem," Sterling said, sliding a folder across the table. "Inside, you'll find 2 options." I opened the folder. The first document was an honorable discharge with full benefits and a sizable lump sum payment. The second was a sealed indictment for treason. Your choice is simple, Harding said, his voice clipped. Accept the discharge, sign the non-disclosure agreements, and walk away with a medal for classified service to your country. Or attempt to pursue this matter further, in which case we'll prosecute you for treason, espionage, and theft of classified materials. That's not a choice, I said, my voice barely a whisper. That's blackmail, that's national security, Sterling corrected, his eyes cold. Project Chimera represented billions in military research. The technology in your blood could completely transform warfare. It turned my friend into a monster that ate people, I shot back, my voice rising. Harding shrugged, an almost imperceptible gesture of indifference. An unfortunate outcome with that particular subject. The project continues, with improvements based on the data collected. I stared at him in disbelief. You're continuing the program, after everything that happened, with modifications, Harding said casually. Your adaptation to serum omega II proved remarkably stable, Vance. In fact, your blood samples have provided valuable insights for the next phase. I suddenly realized they weren't just continuing the program. They were using me to improve it. Every blood draw, every test, every moment of my forced recovery had been designed to refine their monster-making process. What happened to Mac? I asked, my voice barely audible. Harding and Sterling briefly looked at each other, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Subject 2 has been contained, Harding said carefully. That's all you need to know. I looked down at the folder again, at the 2 documents representing my future. I could fight. Try to expose what had happened, what they were continuing to do. But who would believe me? How far would I get before they stopped me? And what would they do with me then? I picked up the pen and signed the discharge papers. Harding smiled thinly. Wise choice, Vance. You'll receive your medal in a private ceremony tomorrow. After that, you're free to go, provided you maintain absolute silence regarding Project Chimera. And if I don't, I asked, my voice barely audible. Then treason will be the least of your concerns, Sterling said quietly, his voice chillingly devoid of emotion. The next day, they pinned a nameless medal to my chest in a room with no witnesses, shook my hand for photos that would never be published, and drove me to the nearest civilian airport, with instructions never to contact anyone associated with the military again. At 31, I was a free man, with a secret that would kill me if I shared it. The years blurred together after that. I moved constantly, never staying in one place long enough to form connections. Cincinnati, Phoenix, Detroit, Portland. I never considered these cities my home, just places to stay temporarily, anonymous harbors. I worked jobs that required physical labor, construction, warehouse work, security, anything that would exhaust my enhanced body enough to allow a few hours of sleep, a brief respite from the ever-present hum of my heightened senses. I avoided doctors, hospitals, and anyone who might notice that I wasn't aging normally. The serum had changed me at a cellular level. At 40, I looked 35, despite the stress and nightmares that should have aged me faster. My wounds healed too quickly. Illnesses barely affected me, and I never got tired like normal people did. I lived invisibly, leaving no trace, forming no bonds, a ghost in plain sight. The nightmares followed me everywhere. Mac's black eyes finding mine through the glass, his inhuman voice rasping my name, the wet sound of tearing flesh as he fed on kale. Some nights I woke up screaming, my enhanced strength destroying whatever furniture was unfortunate enough to be within reach. 5 years after the incident, I found work at a slaughterhouse in Nebraska. The owner didn't ask questions when I gave him my fake ID, just nodded at my build and put me on the killing floor. The work was brutal and bloody, perfect for someone seeking physical exhaustion, a distraction from the constant hum beneath my skin. One evening, as the shift ended, I was hosing blood from the concrete floor when something changed inside me. The coppery smell, thick and metallic, hit my nostrils differently than before, triggering a response I'd never felt, a gnawing hunger that had nothing to do with food and everything to do with a primal, ancient craving. My vision sharpened, focusing with terrifying intensity on the crimson stream swirling down the drain. Without thinking, I dropped to my knees and plunged my hands into the bloody water, the warmth of it unsettlingly familiar. The urge to bring it to my mouth to consume it was overwhelming, a compulsion beyond rational thought, a terrifying echo of Mac's thirst. I fought it, digging my nails into my palms until they bled, using pain to keep myself focused, to anchor myself in humanity. Vance, my supervisor's voice broke the trance, his face a mixture of concern and disgust. You sick or something? I staggered to my feet, struggling to appear normal to force a casual shrug. Yeah, just light-headed, must be the heat. That night I packed my few belongings and left town, terrified by what had happened. It wasn't just the hunger, it was the recognition. I had seen that same look, that same terrible compulsion, in Mac's eyes weeks before he broke. The episodes grew more frequent over the years, triggered by the sight or smell of blood. A cut finger, a nosebleed, a rare steak on someone's plate. Any exposure could set it off, a flick of a switch igniting the beast within. Each time the hunger grew stronger, harder to resist, more insidious. By the 10th year after Project Chimera, I had isolated myself completely. I lived on the outskirts of cities, working night shifts to avoid people, shopping at odd hours. I kept my freezer stocked with raw meat, discovering that consuming it, bloody and still warm, helped take the edge off the cravings, quieted the gnawing emptiness for a short while. The dreams evolved too. Now Max spoke to me through them, his voice a guttural whisper, calling me brother, telling me it was only a matter of time. You will too, he'd rasp, his black eyes gleaming in the shadows of my slumber. I would wake sweating, feeling my teeth with my tongue, terrified they might have sharpened during the night. In year 15, during a particularly bad episode triggered by a car accident I witnessed, I caught my reflection in a window. For a split second, my eyes had darkened. Not fully black like Max had become, but darker than they should be, the irises almost indistinguishable from the pupils. The sight terrified me more than anything else, physical proof that the transformation had truly begun, that serum omega II had not cured the flaw, but merely delayed its insidious creepy started keeping records then. Dates and durations of the hunger episodes, triggers, physical changes I observed. The pattern was undeniable. The cravings were becoming more frequent, more intense. What had once been manageable through sheer willpower now required days of recovery, each episode leaving me weaker against the next. By year 17, I knew I was running out of time. The hunger was almost constant now, a background presence even on good days, a dull, relentless ache. I lived on raw meat and kept physical distance from anyone whose blood might tempt me. Some nights I would chain myself to the bed, not trusting what I might do while unconscious. How much of me might be lost to the primal urge, the irony wasn't lost on me. The military had created a monster in their quest for the perfect soldier, and now I was becoming exactly what I'd feared and fought against. Mac's words returned to me night after night in my dreams. True me, true you too, soon. The becoming, your blood, his blood, my blood. All together, I sat in my latest apartment, a sparse one-bedroom in Chicago, examining my reflection in the bathroom mirror. My eyes had definitely changed, the irises darkening in a way that couldn't be explained by lighting. My teeth remained normal, but for how much longer? I gradually made my decision, the terrifying certainty settling deep within my bones. If I couldn't stop what was happening to me, I could at least ensure the world knew the truth before I lost control completely. The military was still creating super soldiers. I'd seen enough news reports about impossible military operations, heard enough whispers on underground forums to know Project Chimera hadn't died with Commander Thorne. I owed it to Kale, to Silas, to Alina, and even to the man Mac had once been, to expose what had been done to us. That night, I set up my laptop and began typing. My name is Arthur Vance. What I'm about to share will sound impossible, but I swear every word is true. Before I become something I can't control, I need to expose what the government has done, what they turned us into. The confession was only the beginning. Now I had to find proof that the program continued, and if possible, stop it before more monsters like Mac were created. I had to face the reality that I was changing. Each passing day brought me closer to the creature I'd spent 17 years running from, the chilling inevitability of my own transformation. I could feel the hunger even now, a constant presence at the edge of my awareness, waiting for a moment of weakness, for the primal beast within to fully awaken. It wasn't just a hunger for blood. It was a deep, aching void, a thirst for something more, for the thrill of the hunt, the absolute power of the predator. Serum omega II hadn't removed the predatory instinct. It had merely refined it, made it more insidious, turning me into the perfect weapon, the ideal monster they truly wanted. Time was running out, not just for my humanity, but for the world. What chilling detail sent shivers down your spine? Tell me in the comments. Want more stories like this? Follow for more.